Your soulmate had a one-way ticket to follow you, but still let you leave. My beloved child. Your soulmate had a one-way ticket to follow you. Not a reservation they were thinking about making. Not a plan they whispered about and forgot. The ticket was already paid for. Their name was printed on it. Their bag was packed. And while you were preparing to leave, believing the distance between you was about to become permanent, they were hiding one extraordinary truth. They had already decided to come after you. But when the moment finally arrived, they stayed behind. They watched you leave with something in their pocket that could have changed everything. And the strangest part? It wasn't fear of the journey that stopped them. Something happened shortly before your departure, something you were never supposed to know about. Don't skip, because once you understand what they heard that day, their silence may look completely different. Hours before you left, your soulmate was still planning to use that ticket. They had quietly imagined the moment they would appear beside you and finally say, "You don't have to do this alone." They weren't expecting you to forgive every unanswered question. They weren't even expecting you to immediately welcome them back into your life. They simply couldn't accept the idea of letting you disappear without showing you that, this time, they were willing to choose you with action instead of words. Then came one conversation. A person close enough to know pieces of your situation told them something that made them freeze. It wasn't that you didn't care. It was worse in a completely different way. Your soulmate was made to believe that following you would interfere with something you desperately needed, a fresh beginning you had worked too hard to reach. Suddenly, that one-way ticket stopped feeling romantic to them. It started feeling selfish. So they made a decision that hurt more than getting on that plane, train, or bus ever could. They stayed. They let you walk away believing they hadn't chosen you, while they stood there believing that letting you go was the most loving choice they could make. But there was one detail they didn't know. One piece of information had been left out of that conversation, and it changes the meaning of everything. Because after you were gone, your soulmate discovered that you hadn't been asking for a life without them. You had been waiting for one unmistakable sign that they were finally willing to fight for the connection instead of retreating from it. And when they realized this, they pulled that unused one-way ticket back out. What they noticed written beside the departure information made their heart drop, because it revealed they may still have one chance to correct the decision that separated you. The ticket was still there, folded exactly where your soulmate had hidden it, but now one small detail suddenly mattered more than everything else. Beside the original departure information was a change option they had barely noticed before, a narrow window in which the journey could still be moved forward instead of completely lost. For the first time since watching you leave, they understood that staying behind didn't necessarily have to become the final chapter. But before changing that ticket, they needed to know something. Had you truly wanted them to follow you, or were they simply turning regret into hope? That question sent them back through every final conversation you shared. Your pauses. The way you looked at them before saying goodbye. The unfinished sentence you almost spoke. And then they remembered one particular thing you said that suddenly sounded nothing like a farewell. You had told them, quietly, "I just need to know who would actually choose me when choosing me costs something." At the time, your soulmate misunderstood those words. They thought you were speaking about your future, your independence, and the difficult road ahead. Now the meaning hit them differently. You weren't demanding that anyone abandon their life for you. You were asking whether someone could stop hiding behind perfect timing and finally make a clear decision. And your soulmate had been holding the answer in their hand the entire time, a one-way ticket. Stay till the end, because this is where another hidden piece surfaces. The person who convinced your soulmate not to follow you hadn't necessarily lied. They had simply interpreted your feelings through their own assumptions. But there was something your soulmate never asked them, one question that could have prevented the separation completely. So your soulmate contacted that person again. This time, they didn't ask whether following you was a good idea. They asked something far more specific. Did they ever actually say they didn't want me there? Silence followed. Not a quick answer. Not reassurance. Silence. And in that silence, your soulmate understood before the response even came. No. You had never said that. You had never asked them to stay behind. You had never closed the door. Someone had mistaken your need for space from uncertainty as a desire for distance from your soulmate. That distinction changed everything. Your soulmate looked down at the ticket again, but before they could change the departure, another message appeared on their phone. It came from someone they hadn't expected to hear from, and the first sentence revealed that you had left something behind specifically for them. The message arrived from someone who had seen you shortly before you left, and your soulmate almost ignored it because they were already overwhelmed by what they had discovered. Then they read the first line, "There's something they wanted you to have if you didn't come." Those words stopped everything. Suddenly, your departure contained another secret. You had prepared for the possibility that your soulmate might stay behind, but instead of leaving angry words or accusations, you had left a small sealed envelope. Your soulmate went to retrieve it with the unused one-way ticket still folded inside their pocket. And when that envelope was finally placed in their hands, one detail shook them. The date written across the front proved you had prepared it before anyone told them not to follow you. Inside was no dramatic goodbye. No demand. No attempt to make them feel guilty. There were only a few deeply personal lines explaining that you understood why they might hesitate, but you couldn't keep building your future around promises that never became decisions. Then came the sentence that changed everything. If you come, come because you chose this, not because you're afraid of losing me. Your soulmate read it twice. Then again. They finally understood what you had needed from them all along. Not chasing. Not sacrifice. Choice. You had left because you couldn't make that choice for them. And the one-way ticket in their pockets suddenly became almost painful to hold, because it proved they had already made the decision privately. They simply hadn't found the courage to let you see it when it mattered most. But there was something else inside the envelope. Something huge was waiting for them at the bottom, a second folded note containing an address and a date. Underneath, you had written only 7 words. If you still mean it, meet me here. Your soulmate stared at the date and felt their heart race. It hadn't passed. There was still time. Not much, but enough. They immediately checked the ticket change window again and realized the new departure could put them close enough to reach that address before the date you had written. Yet just as they began changing the ticket, they noticed something about the destination that made them stop. The address wasn't your new home. It wasn't your workplace. It wasn't even somewhere your soulmate recognized. And when they searched it, they discovered why you had chosen that place, and what you intended to tell them there. The address led to a quiet place connected to a memory your soulmate thought you had forgotten. Months earlier, during one of those rare conversations when neither of you was pretending to be okay, you had mentioned that place as somewhere you wanted to visit when your life finally felt clear again. You had said that if you ever reached a point where you could stop running from difficult decisions, you wanted to stand there with someone who understood what it had cost you to begin again. Your soulmate had remembered the conversation, but never imagined you remembered it too. Now the meaning was impossible to miss. You hadn't chosen that meeting place randomly. You were giving them one final opportunity to arrive without being persuaded, chased, or rescued from their hesitation. And suddenly, changing that one-way ticket wasn't about following you anymore. It was about answering the question you had quietly left behind. Your soulmate confirmed the new departure. This time, there was no announcement to anyone. No request for advice. No asking whether the decision made sense. They packed the same bag they had unpacked after watching you leave and placed your letter carefully beside the ticket. Yet before leaving, they did one unexpected thing. They contacted the person whose misunderstanding had helped stop them before. There was no anger. Your soulmate simply said, "I should have asked them instead of letting someone else decide what their silence meant." That realization mattered because they finally saw the pattern that had kept the two of you apart. Whenever uncertainty appeared, both of you tried to protect the other by saying less. You left without asking them to follow. They stayed without telling you they had already bought the ticket. Two people trying not to become a burden had accidentally created the exact distance neither of you wanted. Then the journey began. Every mile brought your soulmate closer to the mysterious address, but it also raised a terrifying possibility. What if you had changed your mind? What if the note had been written before the disappointment of leaving alone became too heavy? Still, they continued. Don't skip, because what happened when they finally reached that place was not the reunion they had imagined. Your soulmate arrived early and waited, holding the worn envelope while watching every person who approached. Minutes passed. Then more. The exact meeting time arrived, and you were nowhere in sight. For one terrible moment, they believed they had waited too long to choose you. But then their phone vibrated. A message appeared from an unfamiliar number containing only a photograph and one sentence. The photograph showed the very place where they were standing, taken just moments earlier. And beneath it were the words, "Before you see them, there's one truth you need to know." Your soulmate stared at that photograph, searching every corner of the image for the person who had taken it. Their first instinct was to call the unfamiliar number, but before they could, another message appeared. "They almost came back for you." That sentence changed the entire story. After you left, there had been a moment when you nearly abandoned your fresh start and returned, not because you regretted leaving, but because you feared your soulmate had mistaken your departure for rejection. You had even made it partway through arranging the return before stopping yourself. Why? Because you realized that going back would answer the question for them. Once again, you would be the one crossing the distance, making the difficult choice, and proving the connection mattered. So you stayed where you were. You decided that if your soulmate truly wanted a future with you, the next step had to belong to them. Then came the detail that made their hands tremble. The unknown sender explained that you had asked one trusted person to watch from a distance, not to manipulate the meeting, but to confirm one simple thing before you arrived. Whether your soulmate would actually show up without knowing you were already nearby. That was why the photograph existed. You needed to know their choice was real before allowing emotion to take over. And your soulmate had shown up early. Alone. Carrying the original letter and that changed one-way ticket. For once, there was no misunderstanding between intention and action. They had crossed the distance because they wanted to, even while believing there was a chance you might never appear. Then the sender wrote one final message: turn around, but don't speak immediately. Let them tell you why they left. Your soulmate turned slowly. And there you were. Not rushing toward them. Not smiling as though every wound had magically disappeared. Just standing several steps away, visibly emotional, holding something small in your hand. For a few seconds, neither of you spoke. The silence was different now. It wasn't avoidance. It was the weight of everything that should have been said before you left. Then you stepped closer and revealed what you were holding, your own ticket. Your soulmate immediately recognized the date. It was the return journey you had almost taken after leaving them behind. You hadn't thrown it away. You had kept it for the same reason they had kept theirs, as proof of a decision almost made. But before your soulmate could explain anything, you looked at their one-way ticket and asked a question they weren't prepared for: if I had never left that note, would you still have come? And their answer was about to reveal whether this reunion was built on love, or simply regret. Your soulmate didn't answer immediately. They could have said yes because it was the answer you wanted to hear. They could have pointed to the ticket, the journey, the miles they had crossed, and called that proof enough. Instead, they looked at you and admitted something harder. I don't know if I would have come soon enough. The words hurt, but they were honest. They explained that your note hadn't created their feelings, it had forced them to stop hiding from them. Before finding it, they were already questioning the decision to let you leave. They had already pulled the unused ticket from its hiding place. They had already discovered that you never asked them to stay behind. But your letter gave them one thing they had been missing: clarity. It showed them that following you wasn't about rescuing the relationship. It was about finally becoming brave enough to make their own choice. You listened without interrupting, and then your expression changed. Because there was one more truth you hadn't revealed. You told your soulmate that the meeting wasn't meant to guarantee a reunion. You had asked them there because you needed to see whether the person standing before you was different from the person who had watched you leave. Distance alone couldn't prove that. A ticket couldn't prove it either. What mattered was whether they could finally speak without letting fear, assumptions, or someone else's opinion make decisions for them. Then you asked the question that reached deeper than anything before it: why did you really stay behind? Your soulmate could no longer blame the misunderstood conversation. That conversation influenced them, yes, but underneath it was something more personal. They had been terrified that if they followed you and you still didn't choose them, there would be nowhere left to hide from the truth. That confession changed the silence between you. Your soulmate finally admitted that letting you leave had felt safer than risking a clear answer. As long as distance separated you, they could tell themselves the timing was wrong. They could blame circumstances. They could imagine that someday everything might somehow work itself out. But buying that one-way ticket had brought them dangerously close to discovering whether the connection could survive reality, and at the final moment, fear won. Until now. You looked down at your unused return ticket and slowly folded it in half. Then you told them something they hadn't expected: you had been afraid too. The difference was that leaving had forced you to stop living inside possibilities. Now both of you were standing face to face with no distance left to blame. And just when your soulmate thought you were finally going to tell them whether they still had a chance, you reached into your bag and pulled out one last envelope. The only envelope you had never planned to give them unless they actually came. For several seconds, your soulmate simply stared at that final envelope. Their name was written across the front in your handwriting, but underneath it were 4 words that made the moment feel suddenly heavier: only if you came. You explained that you had written it the night before leaving, when you still didn't know whether they would follow you, stop you, or remain silent. Inside was the truth you couldn't bring yourself to say face to face back then. You had never wanted them to abandon their entire life for you. You never needed a dramatic chase. What you wanted was certainty that when the moment demanded courage, they wouldn't allow fear to make the decision. Your soulmate unfolded the letter carefully, and near the bottom was the line they had been waiting to hear: I didn't leave because I stopped loving what we could become. I left because I couldn't keep becoming it alone. Your soulmate lowered the letter, and this time there was nothing left to hide behind. No third person's interpretation. No missed departure. No distance. They admitted that the one-way ticket had originally been purchased because they genuinely intended to build something beside you, not merely visit until things became uncomfortable. But when they let you leave, they betrayed their own decision before they ever gave you the chance to respond to it. Now they understood something they hadn't understood at the station: following you wasn't the brave part. The brave part was standing in front of you without demanding an immediate promise in return. So they said, I came because I choose you. But I won't ask you to choose me just because I finally showed up. And those words surprised you more than any grand declaration could have, because for the first time, they weren't trying to control what happened next. You looked at the 2 tickets, the one-way ticket they had nearly wasted and the return ticket you had almost used, and quietly placed them together. 2 journeys. 2 people who had almost crossed the same distance in opposite directions. 2 decisions delayed by the same fear. Then you told your soulmate that neither ticket could decide the future now. What mattered was what the 2 of you chose after this moment, with the truth finally spoken clearly. Your soulmate nodded, believing this was where the uncertainty would finally end. But you weren't finished. You turned the final envelope over and pointed to something written on the back that they hadn't noticed. It was a date several weeks into the future, followed by the name of another destination. Your soulmate looked up, confused. And then you revealed why that date mattered. Long before you ever left, you had made one private plan for your future, and whether your soulmate belonged in that plan was the real reason you needed them to come.